He spent his last dollars on something everyone else called worthless. A broken storage unit, moldy boxes, nothing but trash. But his K9 partner wouldn't stop barking at the back wall. Not fear, not hunger, instinct. Hidden behind that wall was something buried for decades, a truth powerful enough to shake a city and give a forgotten veteran one final mission. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle didn't punish you with dramatic cold, it wore you down with moisture. In February, the sky hung low and colorless over Elliott Bay, and the rain arrived like a habit, thin, constant, and stubborn. It slicked the asphalt until it shone like black glass, filled the seams of cracked sidewalks, and seeped into clothes no matter how carefully you layered them. Down in Soto, where warehouses squatted beside rail spurs and the port cranes blinked through fog, the wind funneled under the overpasses and carried the smell of salt, diesel, and wet concrete. The city looked busy from a distance. Up close, it felt indifferent. Noah Granger lived where the indifference collected, under an overpass near a service road, in the shadow of a rail line that shrieked whenever a freight train rolled through. He was 40, tall and spare, with the kind of build that suggested he had once carried heavy loads and expected his body to obey. Hardship had narrowed him. His cheeks were hollower than they used to be, his shoulders slightly rounded from sleeping curled against cold. His hair, dark and uneven, had grown past regulation length and now fell in loose waves that were beginning to silver at the temples. A rough beard covered his jaw, not styled, just grown, another layer against the weather. The angles of his face still showed through, a straight nose with an old bend, cheekbones that caught the weak daylight, eyes the color of faded steel. When he was present, those eyes were steady and polite. When he wasn't, they focused on nothing at all, as if he were listening to something far away. His left knee kept its own calendar. In the damp it ached with a deep pressure. When he stood, the joint clicked and flared, and a dull heat would spread up his thigh. The injury came from a training incident he rarely spoke about, mostly because the official version had nothing to do with what he remembered. In Noah's memory, there was the snap of a cable under strain, the sudden lurch of machinery, a teammate going down under weight that should never have shifted. Afterward, there had been reports, signatures, and a superior's voice made calm on purpose. Operator error, not equipment, not supply, not contracts. Noah had protested once. He had learned quickly what protest cost. He didn't lose his life in the service, but he lost something he had built it around. Trust, or maybe the belief that truth mattered if the wrong people were inconvenienced. But the only reason he was still intact in any recognizable way lay beside him most nights. A German shepherd named Juno. Juno wasn't a pet in the way people meant it. He was a working K9, 7 going on 8, large without being heavy, deep chest, long legs, shoulders built for endurance. His coat was sable, dark along the back with warm brown threading through the ribs, and his face carried a black mask that made his amber eyes look brighter. One ear tipped slightly from an old tear. If you watched closely, you could see a pale scar beneath the fur near his right shoulder. Juno moved quietly, paws careful on slick ground. He didn't bounce, didn't beg, didn't waste motion. Even when resting, he kept part of his attention upright, tracking sound and scent like a job. Their camp was a tidy compromise with discomfort. A tarp tied to exposed rebar, slanted low enough to break the wind, a sleeping bag with a damaged zipper, and a shopping cart holding everything that couldn't get wet. Noah kept his small cookpot wrapped in plastic. Socks were sealed in a grocery bag like valuables. A battered notebook stayed deep in his pack, protected the way other men protected wallets. The routine was strict and repetitive, because strictness was the only thing that kept his mind from spiraling at night. Juno's leash was looped in the same spot every time. Juno's food, when they had it, was measured. Noah ate after the dog. It was not sentimental. It was policy. That afternoon, a white municipal truck rolled up as quietly as a decision already made. A man in a thick rain shell stepped down from the cab. He had a knit cap pulled low, boots that didn't slip, and the tired expression of someone whose job required him to deliver small evictions. He approached slowly, hands visible, eyes flicking once to Juno and then back to Noah. "Hey," he said. His voice was careful, not unkind. "New directive. We're clearing this area. Liability issue. Rail access, inspections. You can't stay here." Noah didn't argue. He had spent years learning how systems spoke when they didn't want to sound cruel. He nodded once. "Can I get an hour?" Noah asked. His voice was rough from cold and too little talking, but it was steady. The man hesitated, then nodded. "An hour. I'll swing back. I'm sorry." When the truck eased away, the rain seemed louder. Noah sat still for a moment, his palm resting on Juno's flank. The dog pressed back, warm through thick fur. A quiet weight that kept Noah anchored. Noah looked at the road, then up at the concrete beams overhead, then toward the gray strip of river beyond the warehouses. Shelters were full. Most wouldn't take dogs. The ones that did came with rules that always seemed designed for people who hadn't lived outside. Noah wouldn't leave Juno behind. That wasn't stubbornness. That was a boundary he could still recognize in himself. He began to pack with the efficiency of someone who had done it too many times. He pulled the tarp free, folded it tight, and cinched it with cord. He rolled the sleeping bag hard to squeeze out air. The cook pot clinked once. He stopped it with his hand, instinctively quieting noise. The shopping cart wobbled as he shifted the weight. Juno stood nearby, watching every movement, the ears turning toward the road whenever a vehicle passed. A woman appeared on the sidewalk, moving with purpose despite the slick pavement. She was in her early 30s, medium height, athletic in a practical way. Strong legs, squared shoulders, the posture of someone on her feet all day. Dark auburn hair was twisted into a compact bun beneath her hood. Her skin was light brown and freckled across the nose. Her eyes were a sharp green, observant and direct. She wore a yellow rain jacket with reflective tape and a messenger bag slung across her chest. Her gloves were scuffed at the fingertips, and the wear told Noah she did work that involved real handling, not just paperwork. Noah had seen her before with outreach groups, handing out food and hand warmers without speeches, and he knew her name because someone once called it when she was leaving. "Maris," Noah said. She slowed at the edge of the space, taking in the dismantled tarp in the cart. "They're moving you," she said, not asking. Noah nodded. "Yeah." Maris opened her bag and pulled out a small paper sack. "Sandwich, apple, jerky," she said. She nodded toward Juno. "One's for him." Noah took the bag, fingers briefly warming against the paper. "Thank you." Juno stepped forward, sniffed Maris's glove once, then sat. The motion was controlled, almost formal. Maris's mouth tightened into a quick half-smile. "He's trained," she said. "He's family," Noah answered, and the word came out flatter than he meant, as if he didn't trust it. Maris glanced toward the road where the municipal truck had gone. "Where are you heading?" Noah didn't want to say it out loud because naming a plan made it vulnerable. Still, he looked south, toward a stretch of derelict industrial lots where old warehouses leaned into each other behind chain link. Places like that were dangerous, but they had roofs. They also had fewer rules. "I'll find cover," Noah said, "somewhere out of the wind." Maris's expression sharpened. "Be careful. Places like that, you get hurt and nobody finds you." Noah gave a small, humorless breath. "Nobody's been looking." She held his gaze, then nodded, as if she understood more than she wanted to. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card with a number written in dark ink. "If you need me," she said, "text, don't call." Noah looked at the card. "I don't have a phone." Maris paused, then pointed down the street. "Corner store 2 blocks over. Ask the older guy who stocks shelves, not the cashier, the stocker. He'll sometimes let you charge a prepaid behind the counter if you're respectful." She hesitated, then added, "You shouldn't have to do everything alone." Noah didn't promise anything. He just slid the card into the inner pocket of his jacket, where it would stay dry. "Okay," he said, and it was the closest he could get to accepting help without feeling exposed. The municipal truck returned almost exactly an hour later. The worker stayed by the curb this time, giving Noah space to leave without making it a confrontation. Noah pushed the cart out from under the overpass. The wheels caught on broken pavement, jolting the load. His knee protested. He kept moving anyway. Juno fell into a close heel on his left side, was matching Noah's pace with the quiet discipline of a partner who understood the job. They moved into the wet city as afternoon faded. Port lights blinked through drizzle, cars hissed over slick lanes. Noah didn't look back at the spot under the bridge. There was nothing to look at, just a patch of damp concrete that would be empty again in minutes, as if he had never been there. He didn't know what roof he would choose next, only that he had to choose one before the temperature dropped. What he couldn't know yet was that the next wrong decision, the desperate one, the kind made with an empty stomach and a loyal dog, would not just keep them alive. It would put them in the path of something Seattle had spent years paying to keep sealed. By the time Noah reached the edge of the industrial district, the rain had settled into a colder rhythm, fine enough to slip past seams and patient enough to soak everything eventually. He steered the cart through service roads where weeds grew out of cracked asphalt and chain-link fences sagged like tired shoulders. The warehouses here were older than the glass towers upriver, built back when utility mattered more than appearance. Some still hummed with night crews. Others were sealed shut, their loading docks yawning open like mouths that had forgotten how to speak. Noah chose one of the latter. The door had been forced long ago, the lock rusted into a suggestion rather than a barrier. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, dry compared to the street. He dragged the cart just far enough to be out of sight and settled into a practiced routine. Tarp up against a wall to block the draft, sleeping bag rolled out, pack hung on a nail that might have once held a safety sign. Juno paced the perimeter once, nose working, ears turning. Satisfied, he lay down with his body angled toward the door, a living wedge of muscle and fur. Noah ate the sandwich Maris had given him slowly, more for the warmth than the calories. Juno received the jerky in measured pieces, chewed with quiet focus. Outside, a freight horn sounded somewhere toward the yards, low and mournful, then faded. Noah leaned back against the wall and let his knee settle into its ache. He didn't sleep. He rarely did the first night in a new place. Instead, he listened, to water dripping somewhere deeper in the building, to the occasional engine, to the steady, reassuring rhythm of Juno's breathing. Morning came without ceremony. The rain eased into a gray mist, and light crept through a row of high windows filmed with grime. Noah packed early, unwilling to linger where attention might find him. He needed food, and he needed a plan that didn't involve drifting until the city decided to move him again. When he stepped back onto the street, a damp flyer lay plastered to the concrete near a bus stop, the paper flattened by footprints in rain. He almost stepped over it. Then he saw the word auction printed in block letters that bled ink. Rainier Lock and Storage, delinquent units, cash only. Noah peeled the flyer up, the paper tearing a little at the edge. It listed a date, today, and a time barely 2 hours away. The address sat on the industrial edge of the south side, close enough to reach on foot. He checked his pocket and counted the bills, smoothing them against his thigh. $85. That was everything left of the last payment that had come and gone without ceremony. It wasn't enough for a room, not even for a week of food if he was careful. It was, however, enough to buy a bad decision. He stood there longer than he meant to, the flyer limp in his hand, weighing the kind of odds he knew too well. Storage auctions were a gamble stacked in favor of people with trucks and experience. Professionals could glance into a unit and read its value in seconds. Noah had neither truck nor margin. What he had was a dog whose ribs were beginning to show under winter fur and a mind that refused to accept waiting as a strategy. What do you think?" he asked quietly. Juno looked up at him, head tilted just enough to suggest attention rather than curiosity. The dog didn't understand money, but he understood motion. He rose and stepped toward the direction the flyer pointed, tail still, posture ready. Noah exhaled. "Yeah," he said. "All right." Rainier Lock and Storage sprawled across several acres of low buildings, painted an industrial gray, each row punctuated by bright blue roll-up doors. The lot was already half full when Noah arrived. Pickup trucks and cargo vans idled, exhaust curling in the damp air. About 20 people clustered near the office, most of them men dressed for work rather than weather, heavy boots, hooded sweatshirts, insulated vests. They stood with the easy confidence of people who knew the rules and expected to win. Noah stayed at the edge of the group. His jacket was worn smooth at the elbows, his boots patched with duct tape. Juno sat at his left, leash looped short, eyes scanning the movement with quiet appraisal. A few heads turned. One man snorted softly and looked away. Noah felt the familiar tightening between his shoulders, the urge to make himself smaller without actually moving. The auctioneer emerged from the office with a clipboard tucked under one arm. His name, stitched in white on an orange safety vest, read, Mason. He was in his late 30s, broad through the chest with a trimmed beard that framed a mouth built for talking fast. His hair was cut short and neat, the kind of cut you kept when your job depended on looking competent. He had the voice for it too, clear, rhythmic, practiced. "All right, folks," Mason called. "You know how this goes. Look, don't touch, cash only. 48 hours to clear your unit. Let's move." The first doors rattled open to reveal stacked furniture and boxed appliances. Flashlights flicked on. Bids jumped quickly. Numbers tossed out without hesitation. 800, 1200. The professionals peeled off early, nodding to one another, already calculating resale. Noah didn't watch closely. He kept one hand on Juno's leash and focused on breathing. Unit after unit went the same way. Tools, shelving, boxes labeled in careful handwriting. Every time a door opened, Noah felt a brief, stupid lift of hope that collapsed just as fast. His money stayed folded in his pocket, heavy as regret. They reached the end of the row. Mason paused in front of a door, set slightly apart from the others, the paint chipped, on the lock thick with rust. "Last one," he said, tapping his clipboard. "Unit 19B, tenant delinquent 9 months. The bolt cutters snapped with a sound that carried. The door stuck, then groaned upward, metal scraping metal. The smell hit first, a damp, sour mix of mold and old paper. Flashlights swept the interior and stopped almost immediately. Sagging cardboard boxes filled the space, their sides darkened by moisture. A broken lamp lay on its side. Black trash bags slumped in a corner, one split to show a tangle of stained clothes. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, then laughter. One by one, people turned away, hands already reaching for truck doors. Mason tried to keep the cadence going. "All right, let's start at 50. 50 for the whole unit." Silence. Someone coughed. A man shook his head. 20? Mason said, with the word falling flat. Noah stepped forward before he could stop himself. The smell wrapped around him, familiar in a way he didn't like. He thought of the bag of jerky, of Juno's ribs, of the empty arithmetic of waiting. 50, he said. A man halfway to his truck glanced back. 60, he tossed over his shoulder, smiling as if it were a joke. Noah's chest tightened. He could feel the bills in his pocket like a pulse. 85, he said, and hated how fast it came out. The man laughed and waved. "All yours." Mason blinked, then grinned, relief creasing his face. Going once, going twice. Sold. 85 to the gentleman with the dog. Noah handed over the cash. His fingers trembled only a little. Mason tore off a carbon receipt and held it out. 48 hours, he said, then nodded toward Juno. Good-looking shepherd. Good luck. The lot emptied quickly after that. Engines started. Tires rolled over wet gravel. In minutes it was just Noah, Juno, and the open mouth of the unit. The quiet felt different now, sharper. Noah stepped inside and began to work. The boxes collapsed when he touched them, paper fused into damp bricks. Magazines disintegrated in his hands, blankets came apart in strings. He dug methodically, because method was all he had left. After an hour, his hope had thinned into something brittle. There were no tools, no furniture worth salvaging, just the remains of a life left to rot. He sank down against the wall, breath fogging in the cold air, and let his head drop into his hands. The familiar weight pressed in, failure again paid for in full. Juno had been quiet until then. Now he stood at the back of the unit, nose pressed to the plywood panel, whining low. Not excited. Intent. He scratched once, then again, claws rasping against damp wood. "Juno," Noah said, tired. "Leave it." The dog paused, glanced back at him, then returned to the same spot, scratching harder. The sound cut through Noah's fog. He pushed himself to his feet and walked over, flashlight beam sliding across the wall. The water stains there were too straight, too deliberate. Noah's heart gave a single heavy thump. Noah didn't move right away. He stood there with the flashlight held loose in his hand, the beam trembling slightly as it traced the back wall of the unit. Juno remained fixed on the same patch of plywood, body angled forward, muscles taut but controlled. He wasn't barking. He wasn't chasing noise. This was not prey behavior. It was assessment. "Show me," Noah murmured, more to steady himself than to command the dog. He crouched and ran his fingers over the dark streaks on the wood. At first glance they looked like water damage, the kind that spread outward in uneven blooms. But these lines didn't bloom. They ran straight, vertical, parallel, as if drawn with intent. Noah pressed harder. The wood shifted under his palm, just enough to register. There was a faint draft against his knuckles, cold and stale, and carrying a smell that didn't belong to mold or rot. Air. Noah leaned back on his heels, heart beginning to beat faster, not with excitement but with the same alert tension he used to feel before breaching a room. He scanned the unit out of habit, checking sight lines, checking the open door behind him, checking the empty lot beyond. No one was there. The auction was over. The professionals were gone. He and Juno were alone with whatever this was. A rusted tire iron lay half buried under a heap of ruined cloth near the door. Noah retrieved it, testing the weight in his hand. It felt solid enough. He wedged the flat end into the seam between the panels and applied pressure, careful at first, then firmer. The plywood resisted briefly, then gave with a wet tearing sound as old nails pulled free. The panel bent inward and dropped with a dull thud, kicking up dust that hung in the beam of the flashlight like smoke. Behind it was a narrow cavity, no more than 2 feet deep, framed by concrete block. It wasn't accidental. The edges were clean. The space had been built to hide something, not to support the structure. Noah's breath caught as he angled the light inside. 3 objects sat on the concrete floor of the void, arranged with care. Closest to him was a small wooden box, dark-stained, smooth to the touch, about the size of a thick novel. The grain suggested mahogany or something like it. Next to it lay a manila folder, thick and rigid with papers, sealed not with glue but with a disc of dark wax stamped with an unfamiliar emblem. At the back of the cavity sat a metal case, painted matte gray, rectangular, heavy. 3 combination locks secured its lid, their dials worn but intact. Noah didn't reach for them immediately. He knelt there, listening to the sound of his own breathing, to the faint rattle of the roll-up door in the wind. This wasn't money left behind by accident. This wasn't sentimental clutter. This was intention preserved. Juno stepped closer, nose dipping into the opening, inhaling the cold, trapped air. He let out a soft huff, then looked back at Noah, eyes steady. The dog had done his job. What came next was Noah's. Noah pulled the wooden box out first. It was lighter than he expected. He set it aside and reached for the folder, pausing when his thumb brushed the wax seal. The surface was brittle with age, the impression still sharp. He hesitated again, then took the metal case last, grunting softly at its weight. Whatever was inside that box mattered enough for someone to secure it properly. He didn't open anything there. The open unit suddenly felt exposed, the empty lot too visible. Noah shoved the plywood panel back into place as best he could. It didn't fit perfectly anymore, but from a casual glance it would pass. He lowered the door until it left just enough room to slip out, then pulled it down the rest of the way with a final rattle. The walk back to the warehouse shelter felt longer than it had earlier. Every passing car set his shoulders tight. Juno stayed close, gait shortened, ears swiveling at each sound. Noah kept the metal case wrapped in his sleeping bag, the wooden box and folder buried deep in his pack. The weight of them wasn't just physical. It sat behind his eyes, a pressure that refused to ease. To inside the abandoned warehouse, Noah secured the door with a length of scrap wood wedged through the handle. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it would buy seconds. Sometimes seconds were enough. He set the metal case against the wall and turned his attention to the folder. The wax seal broke with a dry snap that echoed too loudly in the empty space. Noah winced, then unfolded the papers with care. The first page was a letter written in a shaky hand, blue ink faded but legible. "My name is Elias Hart. If you are reading this, I am likely dead." Noah read slowly at first, then faster as the words tightened around him. Elias wrote of his older brother, Everett Hart, an environmental engineer who had worked on cleanup assessments along Seattle's waterfront 2 decades earlier. Everett had discovered falsified reports, soil tests altered, contamination buried rather than removed, to clear the way for a lucrative redevelopment project. When Everett threatened to take the findings public, he died in what was officially ruled an industrial accident. A gas leak. An explosion. Case closed. Elias described the aftermath, the visits from well-dressed men who spoke softly about futures and families, the unspoken threats aimed at Everett's young daughter. Elias admitted his fear without excuse. He hid the evidence his brother had gathered, paid for the storage unit as long as he could, and waited for courage he never found. The folder trembled in Noah's hands. The wooden box came next. It wasn't locked. Inside, cushioned by faded velvet, lay photographs and a small silver locket. Noah picked up one photo and felt something in his chest give way. A man with kind eyes and unruly hair held a little girl on his shoulders. She couldn't have been more than 6, her smile wide and unguarded. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a name and a year. Rowan, 2005. Noah set the photo down carefully and leaned back against the wall, staring at nothing. The memory he'd spent years avoiding rose uninvited. A sterile office, the smell of industrial cleaner, a superior officer's voice steady as stone. Operator error, necessary risk, case closed. He had known then, just as he knew now, that the words were a lie constructed for convenience. Juno shifted and pressed his weight against Noah's side, grounding him. Noah rested his palm on the dog's shoulder, fingers curling into the thick fur. He wasn't alone in this room. But he wasn't alone in this moment. The metal case remained unopened. Noah studied the locks, tracing the dials with his thumb. Military grade, expensive, designed to keep honest people out and determined people slowed. He didn't have the tools or the skill to open it safely. More importantly, he didn't have a plan. He repacked everything with deliberate care. The folder and wooden box went into the bottom of his pack. The metal case stayed wrapped in the sleeping bag. Noah doused his small flashlight and sat in the dark, listening to the warehouse settle, to the distant hiss of traffic, to Juno's breathing. By morning, he knew 2 things with certainty. First, whatever was inside that metal case would change lives if it surfaced. Second, he couldn't do this alone, and he couldn't afford to choose the wrong ally. As gray light filtered through the high windows, Noah made his decision. He would find Rowan Hart. Not through phones or emails that could be traced. He would find her the careful way, the way he'd been trained to approach unknown contacts when the stakes were high. Juno rose as Noah stood, tail still, eyes intent. Whatever path Noah chose next, the dog would walk it with him. That, at least, was simple. Noah waited until mid-morning to move. Rush hour thinned the streets and blurred faces into purpose, which made a man with a pack and a shepherd less remarkable than he might have been at dawn. He left the warehouse quietly, sealing the door the same way he always did, then cut north through service roads until the buildings gave way to busier blocks. Juno walked close at his left, posture calm, tail low, eyes tracking the rhythm of the city as if it were another patrol route. The dog looked cleaner in daylight than Noah felt, coat thick and orderly despite the damp muzzle already silvering at the edges, an old professional wearing age without apology. Noah chose the downtown public library because it offered 2 things he needed and 1 thing he didn't: access, silence, and rules. The bronze doors were etched and heavy, the stone facade stained dark by years of rain. Inside, warmth gathered in the high ceilings and smelled faintly of paper and polish. A sign posted at eye level did what signs always did. No animals permitted. Service animals only. Noah read it twice, not because he missed the meaning, but because he wanted time to accept it. He led Juno to a thick column just outside the entrance where the overhang cut the rain. He knelt and looped the leash around the base, hands steady. "Guard," he said quietly. "Wait." Juno's ears flicked, then settled. The dog sat square, gaze locked on Noah with the patient intensity of a job well understood. Noah rested his forehead briefly against the shepherd's brow, inhaled the clean animal smell under wet wool, then stood and walked backward until the doors closed between them. He didn't look back again. Looking back would have made it harder. Inside, Noah felt too visible. His jacket was darker with damp, his boots left water on the tile. Students and office workers occupied long tables, faces lit by screens. Noah kept his head down and followed the signage to the public terminals tucked into an alcove. A librarian glanced up from a desk near the stacks. She was a woman in her late 40s with close-cropped black hair and rectangular glasses perched low on her nose, her posture straight with habit rather than tension. She watched Noah the way someone trained to notice irregularities did, curious, not suspicious, then returned to her work. Noah sat and flexed his fingers until the stiffness eased. He typed Everett Hart first. The results were sparse and clinical, archived articles from 2 decades ago, short pieces that used words like incident and unfortunate without attaching agency to them. A gas leak, an explosion. Investigators found no evidence of wrongdoing. The articles closed with condolences and moved on. Noah felt the old, familiar heat rise in his chest, the recognition of a narrative that had been scrubbed clean enough to pass inspection. He refined the search: environmental assessments, waterfront redevelopment, permits. Names began to surface with repetition: consulting firms, shell companies, public hearings with bland titles. Then, finally, Rowan Hart. The name appeared first in a community calendar. Tidekind Collective hosts shoreline cleanup and teach-in. Then, in a local blog that tracked zoning fights with the intensity of a sport, activist Rowan Hart challenges expedited approval for Harbor Point Phase 3. When Noah clicked through, pulse quickening, a photograph loaded slowly. A woman stood at a podium, mid-sentence, one hand braced on a stack of papers. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail that kept it out of her face. Her skin was pale, her cheekbones sharp, her mouth set in a line that suggested she didn't soften for rooms that wanted her to. Her eyes were gray-blue and focused, the gaze of someone who had learned to expect pushback and prepared anyway. Noah read everything. Rowan had studied marine biology before turning to policy, had organized residents when developers tried to rush permits, had testified at hearings that ran long and went nowhere. The pattern was clear. She was persistent, public, and inconvenient. Noah understood that kind of courage. He also understood the cost. He glanced toward the doors and imagined Juno waiting in the cold, then back to the screen. If Elias Hart had been afraid for Rowan 20 years ago, he had been right to be afraid. People who pushed this hard attracted attention. Noah logged off and moved to a table, taking out the small wooden box. He didn't open it again. He didn't need to. He removed one photograph, the clearest one of Everett holding a young Rowan, and slid it into the notebook he carried, wrapped carefully to protect the edges. He wrote a letter by hand, the way he'd been trained to do when electronics weren't safe. The words came measured and plain. No accusations, no promises. Just enough truth to justify a meeting and enough restraint to keep it from sounding like a trap. When he finished, Noah walked to the reference desk. The librarian looked up again. Up close, her eyes were kind but alert, her mouth set with the neutrality of someone who had learned not to pry. "Excuse me," Noah said. "I need to mail a letter." She pointed without speaking. "Dropbox is outside on 5th. Noah hesitated. "And do you know a quiet place near Gas Works Park?" "Public. Busy enough to blend in." The librarian studied him for a second longer than courtesy required. She noted the careful way he held himself, the absence of desperation in his voice, the weight of whatever he carried that wasn't visible. "The main fountain," she said finally. "Midday. You won't be alone there." "Thank you," Noah said, and meant it. Outside, Juno remained exactly where Noah had left him, posture unchanged despite the cold. The dog rose smoothly, tail still, and pressed his head into Noah's thigh as if to confirm contact. Noah exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They walked to the blue mailbox together. Noah paused with the envelope in his hand, thumb tracing the crease. Once this went in, the line he was standing on would be behind him. He dropped the letter. The sound it made was small and final. The days that followed were an exercise in patience. Noah returned to the warehouse, moving only when necessary. He rationed food. He practiced quiet routines to keep his mind from spiraling, checking the locks, counting steps, rehearsing the letter he might never receive an answer to. Juno stayed close, a constant presence that anchored Noah to the present when memory tried to drag him backward. On the third afternoon, Noah ventured out to the corner store Maris had mentioned. The stalker was an older man with a round face and a white beard trimmed short, his movements deliberate, his eyes bright with humor that hadn't yet been worn down. He wore a knit cap indoors and hummed softly as he stacked canned goods. "Phone?" the man said when Noah asked, already reaching under the counter. "Prepaid's fine. Outlet's back there. Don't tell the boss." Noah charged the cheap device and left with it wrapped in a plastic bag against the rain. He didn't turn it on right away. He wanted control over when the world could reach him. That evening, as light drained from the sky, Noah and Juno made their way toward Gasworks Park. The hill rose gently, dotted with people walking dogs and watching the water turn silver under cloud. The old industrial structures stood like relics, skeletal and rusted, true reminders of another era's confidence. Noah chose a bench with a clear view of the fountain and the paths that fed into it. He kept his pack close and his posture loose, scanning without staring. At 1:58 p.m., a practical blue sedan pulled into the lot. A woman stepped out and paused, scanning the park with intent. Noah recognized her immediately from the photograph. Rowan Hart was taller than she looked on screen, her frame spare and efficient. She wore a dark wool coat cut close to the body, jeans and boots built for walking. Her hair was pulled back tight today, exposing the sharp lines of her face. She stood with her arms folded, weight balanced, eyes alert, not anxious, but prepared. Noah waited until she reached the fountain. He stood and approached at an angle that wouldn't startle her, and stopping several feet away with one hand raised, palm open. Juno moved at his side, head level, watchful. "Ms. Hart," Noah said, his voice carried without effort. "Thank you for coming." Rowan's eyes flicked to Juno, then back to Noah's face. Her expression was guarded, professional, edged with skepticism honed by too many bad faith meetings. "You're the one who wrote," she said. It wasn't a question. Noah nodded and reached slowly into his jacket. He withdrew the photograph and held it out, not stepping closer. Rowan took it, and the change in her face was immediate and unguarded. Her breath caught. She stared at the image as if it might dissolve. "My father," she said quietly. "Yes," Noah replied, "and there's more. But not here." Rowan looked up at him then, truly looked. She saw the lines of wear, the steadiness beneath them, but the dog at his side, standing like a sentry. Whatever calculation she made landed quickly. "We're being watched," she said low. Juno's ears lifted. Noah followed her gaze to the edge of the park where a dark sedan idled longer than it needed to. His shoulders settled into readiness. "We need to move," he said. Rowan nodded once. "Then let's not waste time." They turned together and walked into the crowd. They didn't run. Running drew attention. Noah angled them through the park at a pace just shy of casual, letting the crowd swallow their outlines. Rowan walked a half-step ahead, shoulders squared, chin level, the posture of someone who had learned to keep moving when adrenaline spiked. Juno stayed glued to Noah's left knee, head low, ears mapping sound. The sedan remained where it was, idling too long to be coincidence, then rolled forward with deliberate patience. Noah marked it without staring, noted the plate's partial digits, the tint, the way the driver kept distance rather than closing it. Rowan led them off the main path and toward the edge of the neighborhood where old houses leaned into the slope like tired men sharing a secret. "We can't go to my place," she said quietly. Her voice was controlled, the kind that came from practice rather than calm. "Too obvious. I have a friend, former federal. He doesn't scare easily." Noah nodded. He didn't ask for names yet. Names were leverage. They cut through a residential street slick with rain and turned into a narrow alley that smelled of cedar and wet leaves. The sedan hesitated at the corner, then passed without following. Noah waited 3 beats after it disappeared before exhaling. The building Rowan chose was a 3-story brick walk-up with a door that looked older than the code system bolted beside it. She didn't use the keypad. She knocked 3 times, slow, then twice, fast. The door opened an inch, chain rattling. A man's eye appeared in the gap, pale blue and assessing. The chain slid free, and the door opened the rest of the way. Darius Monroe filled the frame with the solid geometry of someone who had once been broader and was now merely efficient. He was in his late 50s, tall, with shoulders that sloped forward from years of bracing against rooms that wanted to surprise him. His hair was iron gray and cut short, his beard trimmed close to the skin, outlining a mouth that didn't waste words. A long scar creased his right cheek from ear to jaw, pale against weathered skin, a souvenir from a life that had not been gentle. He wore a sweater over a collared shirt and jeans that fit without apology. His hands were large and steady. "Rowan," he said. He didn't smile. "You're early." She stepped inside without ceremony. "We're compromised." Darius's gaze flicked to Noah, then to Juno, taking them in with a quick inventory that suggested training rather than curiosity. "Dog," he said. "Sit." Juno sat. Darius nodded once. "Good dog." He closed the door and turned the deadbolt with a practiced twist. Then he locked a second bolt lower down and a third that Noah hadn't noticed until it slid home with a heavy click. "Tell me," Darius said, already walking toward the back of the apartment. The place was spare and deliberate. No framed photos, no clutter, a kitchen table scarred by use, a couch positioned with its back to a wall. A metal cabinet sat in the corner, padlocked. The air smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. Darius gestured to the table. "You have 5 minutes before I decide whether this ends here." Rowan placed the photograph of her father on the table. The image lay between them like a live thing. Darius stopped, then leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Everett Hart," he said. "That's him." Rowan's throat worked. "You knew him." "Knew of him," Darius corrected. "I read the file. Years ago. It was thin on purpose." Noah set the manila folder down beside the photo, keeping the metal case wrapped and out of sight for now. He spoke carefully, keeping his voice level. "We found this behind a false wall in a storage unit. The letters from Elias Hart. He hid evidence after Everett died." Darius took the folder without asking and skimmed the first page, eyes moving faster than a civilian's would. His jaw tightened. "Elias was scared," he said, not unkindly. "Fear makes people small. It doesn't make them wrong." He looked up at Noah. "Who are you?" "Noah Granger," Noah said. "Former Army. This isn't my fight. But it looks like one I recognize." Darius studied him a moment longer. The man's gaze was clinical, but not cold. "Recognition gets people killed," he said. "Sit." Noah sat. Juno lay down at his feet, chin on paws, watchful. They talked for an hour. Noah told the story cleanly. Auction, wall, the things hidden there, the sedan at the park. Rowan filled in the gaps with dates, meetings, permits that vanished into approvals without discussion. Darius listened, occasionally interrupting to clarify a name or a sequence, his questions precise, surgical. When they finished, he stood and poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs, setting one in front of Noah without comment. "There's a box," Darius said, returning to his chair. "You didn't bring it out," Noah nodded. "Locked. 3 dials." "Good," Darius said. "We don't open it here." "Not yet," Rowan bristled. "It's my father's." "And that makes you a target," Darius replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "If there's proof in that box, the people who buried it will try to retrieve it quietly before they destroy it loudly. We control when and where it breathes." Rowan's jaw set, but she nodded. "What do we do?" Darius folded his hands. "First, we make you less predictable. Second, we find out who's watching you. Third, we duplicate everything and give it a pulse." He assigned tasks without ceremony. Rowan would cancel public appearances for a week, citing illness. Darius would pull old contacts, one in zoning, one in environmental review, men who still answered his calls because he'd once protected them when they'd needed it. Noah would retrieve the metal case at first light and bring it to a secondary location Darius controlled, a storage space not in his name. "And you," Darius said to Noah, nodding at Juno, "you keep doing what you're doing. Dogs notice what cameras miss." Night fell thick and early. Rain ticked against the windows. Rowan paced, then stopped at the table, hands braced on the wood. "They killed my father," she said, not as a question. Saying it out loud didn't make it real. It made it sharp. Darius met her gaze. "They let him die," he said. "There's a difference legally, not morally. We'll prove the first and let the second take care of itself." They split just after midnight. Darius insisted Noah take the couch. Rowan took the bedroom. Juno positioned himself where he could see both doors. Noah lay awake, listening to the building settle, the hum of a refrigerator, the distant sigh of traffic. He felt the familiar edge of readiness, the sense that sleep was a luxury. Near dawn, his phone, cheap, newly charged, buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. "Still raining. Be careful." Noah didn't reply. He left before sunrise, moving through streets washed clean by night. At the warehouse, he retrieved the metal case and wrapped it tight, then took a route that doubled back twice and crossed water before heading south. The secondary storage space was a cinder block unit under a different name, rented cash by Darius through a chain of favors. Darius met him there, opened the door, and slid the case inside a steel locker bolted to the floor. "Tomorrow," Darius said, spinning the locker's lock, "we open it with the right tools." Noah nodded. That he felt the weight lift from his shoulders a fraction, not because the danger had passed, but because it now had a shape. That evening, Rowan called a meeting in Darius's living room. The curtains were drawn, the coffee was strong. The plan was simple and unforgiving. Verify the evidence, duplicate it, then choose the moment to let it breathe. No speeches, no heroics. Juno lay between Noah and Rowan, breathing slow, a warm constant. For the first time since the auction, Noah felt the alignment of purpose settle into place. It didn't make him brave, it made him useful. Morning came without ceremony. Seattle wore its usual gray like a second skin, low cloud dragging the light down into a narrow band that flattened color and sharpened edges. The storage corridor smelled of concrete dust and cold iron. Darius had chosen the hour on purpose, early enough that the city was still yawning, late enough that the overnight ghosts had cleared. Noah arrived first with Juno, who patted at heel, nails ticking softly, coat brushed clean despite the damp. The dog was 8 years old, a sable and black shepherd with a broad chest and a calm that came from repetition rather than training alone. He scanned corners without drama, eyes amber and alert, tail low, ready to move when asked. Darius unlocked the outer door and ushered them into the unit he controlled. The steel locker stood where Noah had left it. It was bolted into the floor, paint scuffed from age but unbent. Rowan arrived moments later, hood up, hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck. She had slept poorly. It showed in the slight tightness at the corners of her eyes and the way her hands stilled when they found the table. She didn't speak until Darius closed the door behind her. "Do it," she said. Darius didn't answer. He set his kit on the table, a stethoscope with cracked tubing, a roll of thin shims, a small light, a notebook worn soft from use. He moved with the economy of someone who had opened too many locked things in rooms where mistakes carried consequences. "We open it clean," he said, "or we don't open it at all." The metal case came out of the locker with a weight that demanded respect. Darius ran his fingers over the dials, listening as much as feeling. "Deep military grade," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Late 90s. Whoever bought this knew what they were doing." Noah stood back, arms folded, eyes on the door. He didn't watch Darius work. Watching made people jumpy. Juno lay at his feet, chin down, ears half pricked, tracking the rhythm of the room. It took 20 minutes. The first lock surrendered with a faint click that sounded louder than it was. The second took longer, the dial resisting, until Darius tilted his head, listening through the stethoscope, adjusting pressure by fractions. The third made him smile once, thin and brief, when it finally yielded. He released the latches and lifted the lid. Inside, the contents were arranged with care. A leather-bound journal lay on top, its spine cracked from use. Beneath it sat 2 thick ledgers, the pages ruled and filled in a hand that favored precision. A sealed envelope followed, then a small black cassette recorder, the kind used by reporters before phones swallowed the world. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a slim folder stamped with municipal seals. Rowan's breath caught. She reached for the journal, then stopped herself. Darius nodded permission. She opened it, reading the first lines with a focus that shut everything else out. Noah watched her shoulders lift and fall, the controlled breathing of someone bracing against a wave. "These are field notes," Darius said, flipping through a ledger. "Sampling dates, locations, retests that never happened." He glanced at the envelope. "And this looks like correspondence." Noah broke his silence. Names? Darius tapped the ledger. Plenty. Shell companies. Consultants who signed off on miracles. He set the cassette recorder on the table. And this is a problem for someone. They duplicated everything. Darius photographed pages with a steady hand. Rowan scanned documents into a secure drive, labeling files with a care that spoke to months of work done right. Noah wrote down times and routes on a scrap of cardboard, planning movement as he always had. Where to go, where not to go, what to do if someone tried to stop them. Midway through, the knock came. It wasn't loud. It was precise. 2 taps, a pause, then one more. Darius froze. Noah's hand dropped to Juno's collar without tightening. The dog didn't growl. He stood, weight forward, eyes on the door. Darius moved to the peephole and looked. His shoulders eased a fraction. He opened the door just enough to see the man in the hall. Mate Evan Pike stood there with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a folder tucked under his arm. He was mid-30s, lean to the point of angular, dark hair cut too short to be stylish and too long to be military. Stubble shadowed his jaw, emphasizing cheekbones that gave him a perpetually alert look. His eyes were sharp, restless, the kind that missed sleep and fed on details. He wore a jacket that had seen better days and jeans that knew every bench in the city. "Morning," Evan said. "You owe me 2 favors and a truth." Darius opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "Don't touch anything." Evan obeyed, gaze sweeping the table and stopping on the cassette recorder. His mouth tightened, not with surprise but with recognition. "I was right," he said quietly. Rowan faced him. "Who are you?" "Evan Pike," he said. "Investigative reporter. I used to write about zoning boards until they stopped returning my calls." He nodded toward Darius. "He told me to wait. I waited. Then I saw a sedan circle my block twice last night, and I decided waiting was a bad idea." Noah stepped into view. Evan clocked him and the dog in one glance. "You the muscle?" "No," Noah said. "I'm the brakes." Evan smiled despite himself. "Good. I talk too fast." They spoke in compressed time. Evan had been chasing the same development for months, following permits that slid through without hearings, tracing donations that curved toward silence. He had a source inside the clerk's office who'd gone quiet. "If what's in that box is what I think it is," he said, "we don't dribble it out. We publish once, hard, with backups." Rowan bristled. "Duh, this isn't a headline." "It's accountability," Evan replied, not unkindly. "And it needs daylight," Darius cut in. "We control the release," he said, "not the pace." The decision came fast because it had to. They would secure the originals off-site, give Evan verified copies, and loop in an attorney who knew how to hold a line when pressure arrived. Darius named her, Mara Chen, late 40s, meticulous, a reputation for choosing cases that mattered and finishing them. By afternoon, the sky darkened to the color of wet slate. They split again, routes diverging, times staggered. Noah walked Rowan to a bus stop 3 blocks away, changed direction twice, then doubled back to watch until the bus pulled out. Juno stayed close, eyes tracking reflections in glass. At dusk, Noah returned to the warehouse shelter. He fed Juno, to check the door, sat with his back to the wall. The day's work pressed in, heavy but clean. He thought of the cassette recorder, of a voice captured years ago because someone believed the truth would need help to survive. His phone buzzed once, a text from Darius, "Copy secured. Lawyer in, watch your 6. Noah typed back a single word, "Always." The night settled. Rain returned, steady and patient. Juno curled beside him, breathing even. Outside, the city kept its secrets badly. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Noah felt the shape of an ending that didn't require him to disappear. The city woke louder than usual, as if it sensed a correction coming. Seattle's morning carried the metallic taste of rain that hadn't quite fallen yet. Clouds pulled low and impatient, the kind that made glass towers look like unfinished thoughts. Noah moved through it with the unremarkable rhythm he'd learned to cultivate, neither hurried nor idle, a pace that gave nothing away. Juno matched him without command, 8 years of muscle memory turning sidewalks into quiet terrain. His coat was clean, his eyes bright, the dog's calm a practiced thing that kept Noah anchored when the air felt too thin. By 10, the story was scheduled. Evan had texted at dawn, green light at noon, backups live. Darius followed with fewer words. Lawyer ready? Expect pressure. Rowan said nothing. When she went quiet, it meant she was doing the kind of work that demanded all of her attention. Noah took the long way to Darius's place, doubling back once, crossing water, then returning on a bus he exited early. He didn't expect trouble, but expectation was the enemy of preparation. Juno's ears tracked reflections in storefronts. His head turned once at the passing thrum of an engine that lingered too long. Noah noted the sound and kept moving. Darius's apartment was already in motion when they arrived. The curtains were half drawn. Coffee steamed untouched on the table. Rowan sat with her laptop open, posture straight, jaw set, hair pulled back into a severe knot that exposed the tension in her neck. She looked up when Noah entered and gave a single nod. It was the closest she came to reassurance. At 11:58, Evan called. He was breathless, energized by the proximity of consequence. Once it hits, he said, we don't react. We let it run. The article went live at noon. Not with fireworks, not with rhetoric. Just facts laid end to end like planks across a gap. The headline named names. The body traced dates, permits, signatures. The audio clip, cleaned, verified, sat embedded halfway down, a voice from years ago speaking plainly about shortcuts and acceptable losses. The cassette recorder had done its work. So had Everett Hart. The city responded the way cities do when caught mid-lie. Phones rang. Offices closed doors. A spokesperson issued a statement that said nothing. By 12:15, Rowan's inbox flooded with messages, some cautious, some furious, some pleading for context that had already been given. She didn't answer. Darius had warned her not to. At 12:23, the knock came again. This one wasn't precise. It was practiced, meant to sound official. Darius didn't go to the door. He checked the peephole and snorted softly. They brought a suit. Noah rose. Juno stood, weight forward, gaze steady. The man outside introduced himself through the door as Thomas Bell. His voice was smooth, trained to suggest reasonableness. He said he represented a development consortium. He said they wanted to talk. Darius told him to leave a card and come back with a warrant. Bell's smile showed through the crack of the door, polished and unhelpful. We can make this easier, he said. Easier for who? Darius asked and shut the door. Minutes later, the building's fire alarm trilled, not loud, not urgent, a test tone. Noah's mouth flattened. That's new. Darius nodded. Daylight pressure. They didn't evacuate. Darius knew the building system. He'd helped the owner upgrade it years ago. False alarms happened. They waited until the tone stopped, and the hallway quieted again. Juno relaxed by degrees, the way only trained dogs do, easing back without losing focus. By 1, the story had legs. Evan called again, voice steadier now. City Council announced an emergency review. Environmental Agency reopened the case. They're not saying names yet, but they will. He paused. Someone tried to spike the server. Didn't work. At 1:30, Rowan's phone rang. She stepped into the kitchen to take it, shoulders squared. When she returned, her eyes were bright with something that wasn't relief. My mother, she said. She's proud, she's scared. She asked if I was safe. Darius looked at Noah. Meet me time to move, he said. Pressure escalates after denial fails. They split again, as planned. Rowan would go with Darius to Mara Chen's office, brick building, quiet street, no signage that announced importance. Noah would peel off with Juno and draw attention somewhere else, anywhere else. Evan would stay put and keep writing. Noah took the bus south, then walked back north through neighborhoods that had learned to mind their business. He stopped once to tie his boot, once to buy a coffee he didn't drink, once to sit on a bench and watch the light change. Juno lay at his feet, eyes half closed, listening. The sedan from the park appeared 2 blocks away, then disappeared again. Noah smiled without humor. The trick wasn't to outrun watchers, it was to waste their time. By 4, rain finally fell, soft and persistent. Noah returned to the warehouse shelter, checked the door, fed Juno, then sat with his back to the wall. He thought of Everett's handwriting, of the calm insistence in those notes. He thought of Rowan's hands steadying on the table as the locks remembered what they had been built to protect. He thought of the way cities resisted correction until they couldn't. At 6, Darius texted, "Safe. Injunction filed. Names coming." At 6:15, Evan sent a link to a follow-up. Regulators opening criminal inquiries, donors freezing funds, a resignation rumored but not confirmed. At 6:30, Rowan called. "I'm at Mara's," she said. Her voice was tired, but there was steel under it. "She says this will get ugly before it gets honest." Noah nodded to the empty room. "Ugly doesn't scare me." There was a pause. "I know," Rowan said. That's why I asked you to stay close." Night fell with a quiet that felt earned. The warehouse settled. Rain stitched the dark together. Juno curled beside Noah, breath even, a living metronome. Outside, somewhere, men in suits recalculated. Inside, Noah felt the unfamiliar sensation of being exactly where he was supposed to be, not as a shadow, not as a favor, but as a necessary piece in a machine that had finally decided to turn. Tomorrow would ask more of them. Tonight was proof that daylight could still do work. The rain broke just before dawn, leaving the city rinsed and reflective, streets shining like exposed nerve. Seattle looked cleaner in the early light, but Noah knew better. Systems didn't wash themselves clear overnight. They accounted, or they didn't. He walked with Juno along the edge of the waterfront, boots steady, breath measured, the dog's stride unhurried and sure. 8 years old, sable coat darkened by damp, Juno moved with the confidence of an animal who had learned when to listen and when to decide. He paused once, nostrils flaring, then resumed without prompting. Noah trusted that instinct more than most people's words. By 9, the first formal notices arrived. Subpoenas, requests for preservation, public statements hedged with legal language that sounded careful until you heard the panic underneath. Darius called with clipped efficiency. "Criminal division is in," he said. "Environmental agencies reopening permits going back 20 years. They want statements." Rowan met them at Mara Chen's office an hour later. The building was modest by design. Brick, narrow windows, no nameplate announcing ambition. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon oil. Mara stood when they entered, extending a hand to Noah first, eyes sharp, posture composed. She was in her late 40s, medium height, black hair threaded with silver and pulled back in a precise twist that didn't soften her face so much as clarify it. Her suit was tailored without flash. The lines at the corners of her eyes suggested long days and longer nights spent winning arguments she had chosen carefully. "I'm glad you're here," Mara said. "Sit, all of you." They did. Juno lay down beside Noah's chair, chin on paws, gaze moving between doors and shadows. Mara noticed the dog and nodded approval. "He'll help," she said. "Dogs always do." She outlined the day with the economy of someone who respected time. A grand jury had been impaneled. The audio clip had triggered mandatory review thresholds. A former deputy commissioner, named in Everett Hart's notes, had requested counsel. That request alone had cracked a seam. "Once one person reaches for a life raft," Mara said, "others notice the water." Rowan listened without interrupting, hands folded, shoulders squared. The strain of the last 48 hours had etched a fine line between her brows, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "What do you need from me?" "Patience," Mara said, "and precision." They moved to the conference room where statements were prepared. Noah stayed quiet, present, absorbing the cadence of a process he'd learned to mistrust and now had to believe in anyway. He watched Rowan as she answered questions, dates, meetings, documents, never embellishing, never retreating. He saw the way Mara guided the record, framing answers to withstand crosswind. This was another kind of training, Noah thought, discipline applied to truth. At noon, a knock interrupted them. This time, it was welcome. Mara's assistant ushered in Samuel Ortega, a senior investigator from the Attorney General's office. Ortega was mid-50s, stocky, with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes that had seen enough to value corroboration over charm. His suit fit comfortably. His shoes were scuffed from walking places that didn't care who he was. He shook hands without ceremony. "We're not here to make friends," Ortega said, taking a seat. "We're here to make a record." They did. Ortega asked questions that cut through narrative to mechanics. Who signed? Who paid? Who benefited? He listened to the tape once, eyes closed, then again, watching faces. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. "That'll do," he said. "That'll do just fine." Outside, the city buzzed. A press conference was scheduled for 3. By 2, donors had issued statements freezing contributions pending review. A development consortium announced it would restructure leadership. The language was bloodless, but the meaning was not. Evan called with a laugh that sounded like relief colliding with exhaustion. "Mate, they're tripping over themselves," he said. "I'm already on the next piece." By 3:30, the press conference concluded without fireworks. Facts presented, questions taken, no theatrics. The work spoke for itself. Noah stood at the back with Juno, unseen and content to remain so. He caught Rowan's eye once as she stepped away from the podium. She nodded, a small gesture that carried weight. Evening brought the first resignations. Names that had been untouchable in the morning were suddenly fragile by dinner. Mara sent them away with instructions and a warning. "This part feels like victory," she said. "It's not. It's the middle." Noah returned to the warehouse as the light thinned. He fed Juno, checked the door, sat. The quiet pressed in, familiar and earned. He thought of Everett Hart's handwriting again, each of the insistence there. He thought of Elias Hart's fear, and how courage sometimes arrived late but still mattered. He thought of the way Rowan had held herself when the questions sharpened. The city outside rearranged itself, one ledger entry at a time. The call came after dark, Rowan's number. "They issued indictments," she said. Her voice broke on the word and then steadied. "Multiple counts. They named him." Noah closed his eyes. He didn't ask who. He knew. "How do you feel?" "Like the ground moved," Rowan said, "like it stopped lying." They met the next morning at the waterfront again, this time under a sky that had decided to be generous. Sunlight cut through the clouds, clean and unapologetic. Rowan wore jeans and a sweater, hair loose, face pale but lighter. Mitty, she stopped when she saw Juno and crouched to scratch behind his ears. The dog accepted the attention with dignified pleasure, tail giving one measured sweep. "I didn't thank you," Rowan said, standing. "Not properly." Noah shrugged. "You did the work." "So did you." She hesitated, then continued. "Mara asked if you'd consider staying on. Security, logistics, the unglamorous parts that keep things upright." Noah considered the water, the ferries cutting white lines through gray-blue. He thought of long nights and shorter days. He thought of being useful without disappearing. "I'll think about it," he said. Weeks passed. The accounting continued. Funds were redirected, permits revoked. Cleanup began where it should have years ago. The city learned to say Everett Hart's name aloud. A scholarship was announced in his field. Rowan attended the first-class presentation, sat in the back, cried once, then took notes. Noah took the job. It wasn't charity. It was work. He set schedules, secured sites, taught people how to notice what mattered. Juno became a familiar sight, padding hallways, lying in sunlit corners, a quiet assurance that vigilance could be calm. On a clear afternoon, Noah stood at the edge of a restored shoreline and watched volunteers plant native grasses. Rowan stood beside him, hands in pockets, eyes forward. "This is the long part," she said. He nodded. "It always is." Juno leaned against Noah's leg, warm and solid. The city behind them hummed, not clean, not perfect, but accountable. That would have to be enough. For now it was. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with blinding light or thunder from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a forgotten soul, and a truth preserved simply because someone refused to abandon their conscience. God does not always change the world in a single moment, but He places the right people in the right place at the right time to remind us that no one is invisible, no pain is overlooked, and no truth is buried forever. If you are watching this story and feeling tired, lost, or forgotten, remember this. You may not see the miracle yet, but God may already be preparing it for you. May God bless everyone watching this video. May He protect you, your family, and every soul in need of a second chance, whether human or voiceless. If this story touched your heart, please share it to spread hope. Leave a comment, perhaps your country, or a prayer for someone who needs strength today. And don't forget to subscribe, because every subscription helps stories of healing and faith continue to be told. God is always there, even in the darkest places, even for the most forgotten among us.